was the second weekend of October, the kind of weekend that feels like the last breath of autumn before winter sets in. The air was crisp, dry leaves scraped across the dirt road as my tires rolled over them, and the sky was a flat gray sheet, no sun, no warmth. Just that stillness that only happens before the cold really takes hold. I had promised my boys, Matt and Ryan, a camping trip for months. Life had been busy, and they'd been asking nonstop. So, I picked a state forest about 2 hours from home. Somewhere quiet, somewhere simple. When we pulled into the campsite, it was almost sunset. The trees were a deep orange and red, and the ground was covered in leaves so thick you couldn't see the soil beneath. The boys ran ahead, laughing, kicking up piles of them while I unloaded the cooler and the tent from the truck. There were only 2 other groups camping nearby. One family with a camper parked a good distance down the trail, and another site farther off that I could just barely make out through the trees. By the time the tent was up and the fire was going, the woods had gone still. The smell of smoke mixed with the earthy scent of rotting leaves. We roasted hot dogs and told dumb jokes. The kind of night that feels perfect because you don't expect anything bad to happen. It was around 8 when I noticed him. A man walked out from the tree line about 30 yards from our site. He wasn't holding a flashlight, and he didn't have any gear with him. Just a dark jacket, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. He wasn't walking toward us exactly, more like drifting near the edge of our firelight, pretending to look around. "Evening," I called out, trying to sound casual. The boys went quiet, watching him. He stopped and smiled. "Evening," he said back. His voice was calm, but something about it was off, like he was forcing himself to sound friendly. "Didn't mean to startle you," he added, stepping a bit closer. "Didn't think anyone else was up this far." "We got here earlier today," I said. "You camping out here too?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, sort of." That answer stuck with me. Sort of. He stood there for a moment too long, like he was waiting for me to invite him over. The fire crackled, and I realized I could hear his breathing from where I stood. Heavy, slow. "You here by yourself?" I asked. He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No," he said after a pause. "Not really." Matt, my younger one, whispered, "Dad, I don't like him." The man turned his head slightly, like he'd heard him, and that made my skin crawl. I forced a laugh and said, "Well, hope you have a good night, man. We're turning in soon." He nodded again but didn't move. Just stood there for another few seconds before saying, "You folks be careful out here." Then he turned and disappeared into the dark, his footsteps muffled by the leaves. I didn't say anything for a while. We all just listened to the forest. You could hear the faint whistle of the wind, a few crickets, and then nothing. We went to bed not long after, but I couldn't sleep right away. Every sound outside made me flinch. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves. Around midnight, I sat up, just listening. I thought I heard someone walking again, slow steps circling somewhere near the edge of our campsite. But when I peeked through the flap, there was no one there. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember was being jerked awake by a sound that didn't belong in the woods. It was a scream. A man's scream. High-pitched, raw, and full of panic. It echoed through the trees, bounced off the hills, and hit me right in the chest. Matt and Ryan both shot up, crying before they even knew why. I reached for my flashlight, but my hand was shaking. The screaming came again, closer this time. It sounded like someone was being torn apart. Then it stopped, cut off mid-breath, like something had covered his mouth. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. "Dad," Ryan whispered. "What was that?" I didn't answer. I just said, "Get your shoes on, now." I stepped outside the tent, scanning the dark tree line. The fire had burned down to embers, and the woods looked endless, black and empty, except for the faint mist rolling between the trunks. There was no movement, no flashlight beam, nothing human. But the smell hit me then. Iron and smoke. Blood. I didn't wait to find out what happened. I told the boys to grab what they could. I shoved the cooler and a few bags into the truck, barely latching the tailgate before I climbed in. My hands were trembling so bad I could hardly get the key into the ignition. As we started down the dirt road, the forest closed in on both sides. The headlights caught leaves spinning through the air, flashing orange and red before vanishing into the dark. Ryan was crying quietly in the back seat, Matt staring out the window like he expected something to appear beside us. We were about a mile from camp when I heard the gunshots. 2 quick ones, then another a few seconds later. The sound carried through the trees like thunder, sharp and distant, but close enough to make my heart drop. I didn't say anything. I just pressed harder on the gas. The truck bounced over roots and potholes, and every sound outside, every crunch of leaves or snap of a branch, felt like it was chasing us. When we hit the main road, I finally looked back. The forest behind us was completely dark. No headlights, no lanterns, no sign of anyone else. I drove until we reached a small gas station, about 20 minutes away. It was one of those half-lit ones, with flickering lights and old vending machines out front. I parked under the single working light and got out, trying to stop my hands from shaking. The clerk inside was an older guy, sitting behind the counter with a radio playing softly. I asked if he'd heard any gunshots. He looked up at me like I'd asked if he'd seen a ghost. "Gunshots?" he said. "Out here?" "Yeah," I said. "Near the state forest." He shook his head. "Ain't nobody supposed to be out there this time of year. They shut down most of the campgrounds after Labor Day." "You sure it wasn't fireworks?" I didn't answer. I just thanked him and went back to the truck. We drove home that night without stopping again. I didn't even look in the rearview mirror. The next day, I called the local sheriff's office. I told them what I'd heard, the screaming, the gunshots, the man who'd walked up to our site. They said they'd send someone to check it out. A week later, I got a call back. The officer said they found a campsite near where we'd been, about half a mile deeper into the woods. Looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. Tent ripped open, sleeping bag torn, blood on the ground. They didn't find anyone there. When I asked if they found the man, the officer hesitated before saying they didn't know who I meant. There weren't any other registered campers that weekend, he said. Just you. I told him again about the man with the baseball cap. I described his voice, his clothes, how he'd come from the trees. The officer didn't argue, but his tone changed. More careful. "We'll keep looking," he said. "If you think of anything else, give us a call." That was the last I heard. The leaves are gone now, and the trees are bare. Every time I drive past the edge of that forest, I think about that scream echoing through the dark and the smell that came after. I think about the man's grin, the way he said, "sort of," when I asked if he was camping alone. Sometimes I wonder if those gunshots were someone defending themselves or something else entirely. It was one of those chilly October evenings where the world felt quieter than usual. The air had that sharp, smoky edge from wood stoves and burning leaves, and the sky was bruised purple, the kind of dusk that made everything look haunted. I was on my way to an old orchard outside of town, Hollow Creek Orchard, a place people around here always talked about but never seemed to visit anymore. I wasn't there for apples. I was there because of my job. I worked for a small pest control company that handled everything from raccoons in attics to roach infestations in diners. The orchard's caretaker, a man named Dale, had called that morning. He said something had been getting into the barn, something that wasn't afraid of traps, lights, or dogs. He didn't say what he thought it was, only that I needed to come before dark. So I did. When I pulled up, the place looked like something from a painting. Rows and rows of trees shedding their leaves, the ground covered in red and gold. The barn was off to the side, large and faded, leaning just enough to make me nervous about stepping inside. There were no sounds of birds, no wind through the branches, just stillness. Dale came out to meet me, wiping his hands on an old flannel shirt. He was in his 60s, tall and wiry, with deep lines around his eyes, like someone who'd spent a lifetime squinting against the sun. "Appreciate you coming," he said. "Ain't sure what we're dealing with." "What's been happening?" I asked. He glanced over his shoulder toward the orchard before answering. "Started with noises. Thought it was coyotes, but then the dogs wouldn't go near the barn. Started finding the apples scattered everywhere, half chewed, like something had been dragging them out. Then a few nights ago," he hesitated, "heard something screaming, like a man, but not." He said it like someone who didn't want to believe his own words. I followed him to the barn. The door creaked when he pulled it open, releasing a stale, earthy smell, dust, hay, and something else underneath, something metallic. The light from outside hit the dirt floor, and I saw claw marks in the wood near the entrance. They weren't animal-sized. They were bigger. "Coyotes didn't do that," I said. Dale nodded grimly. "Told you it wasn't no coyote." I set up my flashlight and walked around the inside. The back corner was darker, the air colder somehow. There was a hole torn through the lower part of the wall, like something had clawed or forced its way in. Around it, the wood was wet and dark, blood by the smell of it. "What animals do you keep out here?" I asked. "Used to have goats," he said, "but they're gone." "Gone," he shrugged. Gate was still closed. No tracks, just gone. I crouched near the hole. The ground outside was a mess of mud and leaves, but I could see faint impressions, 2 deep, parallel tracks that didn't match any animal I knew. They looked almost like footprints, but wrong. The spacing was uneven, like whatever made them dragged itself instead of walking normally. That's when I noticed something caught on the splintered edge of the wood. A scrap of fabric. I held it up. It looked like denim. Dale's face changed when he saw it. That's what I was afraid of. He didn't say anything else for a long time, just stared out toward the orchard. The wind had started picking up now, carrying the dry sound of leaves skittering across the ground. "You said you heard screaming," I said carefully. "You think someone's out there?" He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "Used to be a man who lived in those woods. Worked this place before me. Stayed on even after the owners sold it. Wouldn't leave when they told him to. One day he just stopped showing up. Folks figured he moved on, but I don't think he ever left." "Are you saying you think he's still here?" He looked at me then, eyes hollow. "I think something's here." That was enough for me. I set a few trail cameras near the hole and another along the orchard path, then told him I'd come back in the morning to check them. He didn't argue. He just handed me a flashlight and said, "Don't stay long." By the time I reached my truck, the sun was gone. The orchard looked different now. Darker, endless. I could hear the faint rustle of branches, the soft thud of apples falling somewhere deeper in. I turned to take one last look at the barn, and I swear I saw movement in the upper window. Just a flicker of a shape, too fast to make out. I told myself it was nothing and drove home. The next morning, I came back early. The light was pale and cold, the grass slick with frost. The barn door was open when I arrived. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, everything looked undisturbed, except for the floor near where I'd placed one of the cameras. The tripod was still there, but the camera itself was gone, torn off. The metal mount was bent backward. I felt something heavy in my stomach as I went to check the other camera along the path. It was still there, but the lens was cracked. When I pulled the memory card and checked the images on my laptop, most were dark or blurry. But there was one that froze me. It showed the orchard at night, rows of trees fading into blackness, and between them, a shape, tall, hunched, and pale against the dark. Its head was tilted like it knew the camera was there. The timestamp said 2:43 a.m. I showed the photo to Dale when he came out of the house. His face went gray. "That's where I heard the screaming," he said quietly. We stood there in silence. The only sound was the wind through the dead branches. I told him we needed to report it, whatever it was. He didn't answer. He was staring at the trees again, eyes glassy. "It don't want to leave," he murmured. Never did. That's when we heard it. A single sharp crack echoed from somewhere deep in the orchard, like a branch breaking, but louder. Then another. Then the sound of something moving fast through the leaves, heavy and uneven. "Inside," Dale hissed, pulling me toward the barn. We got the door closed and bolted it. For a few seconds, there was nothing, just our breathing. Then came the sound of scraping outside, slow, deliberate, dragging across the wood. Something brushed against the wall near the hole, and the smell hit me again, iron and rot. Dale raised his shotgun, hands trembling. The scraping stopped. Then, from just outside the door, a voice. Low, slurred, human. "Dale," it said his name. He froze. I looked at him, and his face had gone white. The voice came again, closer this time. "Dale, open the door." It didn't sound right. Too slow, too careful, like it was trying to remember how to talk. He took a step back, shaking his head. "That ain't him," he whispered. The wood started to splinter near the hinges. I could see the nails bending, the boards straining. Something was pressing against it from outside. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. We waited 5 full minutes before moving. When I finally cracked the door open, there was nothing there. just crushed leaves and a few long drag marks leading away into the orchard. That was the last time I saw Dale. When I came back the next day with a deputy, the house was empty. His truck was still in the driveway, but the doors were wide open. The deputy searched the barn while I went to the orchard path where we'd heard the sounds. Near the first row of trees, the ground was torn up, like something had been dragged through the mud. They never found him. I quit that job a month later. Couldn't go near another barn without thinking about those tracks in the dirt. The company sent someone else to Hollow Creek a few weeks after I left, but he didn't stay long either. Said the air out there was wrong. Sometimes, when the wind's blowing from the west, people in town say they hear it. A scream drifting across the fields, faint but unmistakable. No one goes near that orchard now. The trees are still there, rotting where they stand, the fruit turning black before it falls. Every October, someone posts an old photo of Hollow Creek online, rows of trees glowing orange in the sun. And people comment about how beautiful it used to be. But I've seen it up close. It's not beautiful anymore, and I know whatever's still out there in those trees is waiting for the next fool who thinks it's just an abandoned orchard. It was mid-October when the fog rolled in and never left. Not the kind that sits low over the fields in the morning and burns off by noon, but a heavy, living kind of fog that clung to everything. You couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead, and the air tasted like metal. I was working the closing shift at the Maple Hollow General Store, a place that looked straight out of another decade, with creaky wood floors, glass soda bottles, and an old brass bell over the door that jangled whenever someone came in. Most nights were uneventful. A few hunters passing through, maybe a trucker getting coffee. But that night felt off the moment I clocked in. The sky had gone that dull, bruised orange that comes before rain, and the wind had a bite to it. By 7, the fog had swallowed the whole town. I couldn't even see the street from the window anymore. The lights outside glowed like floating orbs, disconnected from the world. I was supposed to work until 10, but my manager, Carl, called around 8 and said the power company was warning about outages. If the lights go, lock up and head home, he said. Got it, I told him. There was only one other person in the store then, a man in a brown jacket, standing by the window with his hands shoved in his pockets. I hadn't heard him come in. The bell hadn't rung. He wasn't shopping, just standing there, staring out at the fog like he was waiting for something to step out of it. Everything all right, sir? I asked. He didn't answer. Didn't even look at me. Just kept watching. I shrugged it off and went back to stocking the coffee shelf, but I kept glancing his way. The guy wasn't moving, not even shifting his weight. Just still. The air around him looked thicker somehow, like the fog was pressing against the glass. Around 8:30, the lights flickered. The fluorescent hum cut out for half a second, then came back with a buzz. When I looked up again, the man was gone. The bell hadn't rung. I walked to the window, but there was nothing outside except the fog. I couldn't even see the gas pumps. That's when I noticed something else. Footprints. Wet, heavy ones leading away from the door, across the tile, and stopping right behind the counter where I stood. They were fresh. I froze. My first thought was maybe he'd slipped past me and was hiding in one of the aisles. But I didn't hear anything. Just the hum of the fridge coolers and the faint whine of wind against the building. I grabbed the flashlight from under the counter and started down the first aisle. The beam cut through the fog seeping under the door, catching on rows of candy, chips, and stacked canned goods. Everything looked normal. I checked the second aisle. Nothing. But when I got to the third one, I heard something breathing. It was soft, ragged, like someone who'd been running. "Hey," I said, keeping the flashlight low. "Store's closing soon." No answer. Just breathing. I turned the corner, and my light hit the end of the aisle. Empty. No one there. But the breathing didn't stop. It sounded closer, now coming from behind me. I spun around, shining the beam back toward the counter. Nothing. The footprints were still there. But there was another pair now, smaller ones, right beside them. That's when the bell over the door rang. I ran back to the front, but when I got there, the door was still closed, locked. The lights flickered again, harder this time, and the radio behind the counter cut on by itself. Static at first, then a faint voice under the noise. I couldn't make out the words, just the tone. Urgent, scared. The fog outside pressed tighter against the glass. For a second, I thought I saw shapes moving in it, figures maybe, or shadows shifting where they shouldn't be. The voice on the radio got louder, breaking through the static. You have to stay inside. Don't look at it. Then it cut out completely. That's when the knocking started. It came from the back door, the one near the stockroom. 3 heavy knocks, slow and even. I stood there, heart hammering, trying to tell myself it was a delivery driver or a hunter or anyone human. But when I turned the corner, I saw the outline of a hand pressed against the glass. The shape wasn't right. The fingers were too long, the palm too wide, and it wasn't leaving fog like a normal handprint. It looked wet, smeared with something dark. Then it tapped the glass again. I backed away, locking the door from the inside, even though I knew it wouldn't matter if whoever or whatever wanted in badly enough. The fog outside moved, swirling against the windows like it was breathing. The lights dimmed again, and the hum of the coolers died. Everything went silent. I tried to call Carl, but my phone just buzzed with static. No bars, no signal. I started thinking about the man in the brown jacket, how he hadn't made a sound when he left, how the bell never rang. Maybe he hadn't left at all. Maybe he'd gone out the back door, the one the thing was now standing behind. Then the lights went out completely. The store was swallowed by darkness. My flashlight flickered, casting a weak, trembling glow on the walls. The air felt thick, heavy. Every breath I took felt wrong, like I was breathing through fabric. I decided to make a break for it. The keys were still on the counter by the register. If I could grab them and get to my truck, I could be home in 10 minutes. I crept forward, my shoes squeaking against the tile. The bell above the door jingled softly, even though no one had touched it. I stopped, staring at it. It was swaying back and forth on its hook just slightly, like someone had brushed past. And then I saw the reflection. In the glass of the front window, something was standing in the fog. A tall figure, its head tilted, face pale and featureless. Its arms hung too low, the fingers almost reaching the ground. The bell rang again. The door hadn't opened, but it was inside now. I didn't see it move. 1 second it was in the fog. The next it was standing between the aisles, half hidden in the dark. My flashlight caught its outline for just a moment. Long limbs, shoulders too broad, its skin looking stretched and thin like old parchment. It turned its head toward me. I dropped the flashlight and ran. I hit the counter, grabbed the keys, and sprinted to the door. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't get the lock to turn. I could hear it behind me, the sound of something dragging against the floor. When I finally shoved the door open, the fog poured inside like smoke. I bolted out to the parking lot, but the world was gone, just a wall of gray. The truck was there, maybe 20 feet away, but it looked distorted, like I was seeing it through warped glass. I ran for it anyway. Halfway there, I heard whispering. Not loud, just right next to my ear. Words I couldn't understand, but they froze me in place. The air was freezing now, my breath coming out in thick clouds. The whispering grew louder, circling me, moving in the fog. I reached the truck, fumbled the keys, got the door open, and slammed it shut. My headlights cut through the fog for maybe 10 feet. Beyond that, nothing. Then I saw movement again. The figure was standing in the light, just barely visible. It tilted its head, then took one slow step forward. Another. I threw the truck in reverse, perched tires screeching on the wet asphalt, and tore out of the lot. The fog chased me down the road, thicker than I'd ever seen it. I didn't stop driving until I hit the next town over. When I finally pulled into the diner parking lot and ran inside, the fog stopped at the edge of the light. Just sat there, like it couldn't come closer. The people inside stared at me like I was insane, covered in sweat, shaking, mumbling about something in the fog. I tried to tell them, but the words came out wrong. They called the sheriff. When he drove back to the store an hour later, the fog had lifted. He said everything looked normal. No footprints, no broken glass, nothing. Except for one thing. On the front window, written in something dark and dried, were the words, "You looked at it." The store closed for good a week later. The owners said it wasn't worth reopening after the power grid failures that night. But I still drive past Maple Hollow sometimes, especially in October. The building's still there, empty, windows dark. And sometimes when the air's just right and the fog starts to roll in, I swear I can see the faint glow of lights still on inside, like someone never left.